Um, when I first got, 1942 in the fall, I went in at Fort Custer, Michigan. I was drafted. I was working on a scientific project, but through a mix-up, my deferment was not recorded, so I was drafted in the Army.
What was your background before you entered the Army? Where were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and raised in rural Michigan, Avoca, Michigan. I went to a one-room country school and went to high school in Yale, Michigan. And really, I wasn't very interested in school, except I had to keep my grades up in order to play ball. So that was the stimulation at first.
What, baseball?
Baseball, basketball, football, track, and that was my main interest in those days. And so in high school biology class, we were asked to make our family tree. We're studying a little bit about genealogy, and that became a lifetime hobby for me.
Very good.
And so I went to Port Huron Junior College, and then I went to a trade school and I became an electronic engineer. And I took my girlfriend to college to drop her off, and I decided, what am I going to do now? So I registered at Michigan State University, and let's see, I registered in the physics department, and I took a lot of courses in education department, got a teaching credential with a major in math, a major in physics, and a minor in chemistry. So then I went to work for Dow Chemical Company as a research physicist, and from there I was drafted into the Army.
Okay.
And, in the Army, I was in the Army Air Force, and let's see, I was assigned to Chemung, Illinois, where I took link training. I became a link trainer instructor, and then I taught at the link trainer instructor school, and there I got into I visited a laboratory in the University of Illinois, and at this lab there was a MP sergeant at the entrance, and he was asleep. I didn't think much of it. I went on in. When he woke up and found me there, I was investigated for getting into a research area where they're working on atomic energy. And
What did they do when they investigated you?
well, they didn't do much to me. They just told me that I shouldn't be there, and but the FBI went to my hometown and talked to people, and
Was this in 1942?
42. This would have been February 43,
Okay.
and anyway, they asked so many questions that the family became suspicious. My aunt told people that I was a spy. She didn't say which side I was on. So as a result of that investigation, I was asked to go to officer candidate school. And so I signed up for Signal Corps officer candidate because electronics was my main interest by then. And they sent me to the engineers officer candidate school. Every week I wrote to the Army and I requested transfer to the Signal Corps. And then just before graduation, the Manhattan District recruiter came down to see me. And he said, of course, at engineer school, we no longer had a rank. I was a corporal when I went in there, but they called us Mr. And he said, Mr. Collins, I see you've requested transfer to the Signal Corps. And I looked at the castle's engineer's insignia on his lapel, and so I said, Major, I've written every week requesting a transfer, and by now the Army must know what my interests are. And if they have something else for me, I'll be glad to do it. And he said, I'm glad you said that because we have a special assignment. And he proceeded to tell me as much as he could about the assignment without breaching military security. He couldn't tell me working on a bomb or anything. But he told me I would probably be assigned to a university and would be doing some research for the Army, and he didn't even tell me the subject. And he said, but you'll probably be in civilian clothes and people will think you're a draft dodger. I said, I can handle that. I didn't want to be in the Army in the first place. Anyhow, so upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, I reported to the Manhattan Engineering District headquarters in Manhattan Island. And there, I had a temporary assignment of reviewing the prints for a big plant. They had blueprints for the electrical system, and my assignment was to check to see for compatibility of the stuff going from one print to the next to make sure that they were the same. I was really impressed because this was a huge operation and a tremendous amount of electric power. And the only thing, and give me a hint of whatever it was in the title block, it was Y12. Didn't mean a thing to me then, of course. And then I was transferred to the Chicago area office, which by that time was the research for the Manhattan District. They started in Columbia University, but they moved to Chicago to get farther away from the coast. They had just completed the Fermi reactor in the West Stands of Chicago when I got there. And, so I got to see that operation.
You got to see the first experiment with it?
Well, yeah, they were experimenting with it when I got there. And I participated from a safety point of view.
What exactly did you do?
My assignment was to review the instrumentation being used by the Manhattan District for measuring radioactivity, specifically portable survey instruments, and to select the ones that might be best used for the military. Personally given assignment by General Groves himself. I met him in New York, and on several occasions did special things, assignments for it. And so this, for some reason, the general wanted an Army officer to do this rather than a civilian because he felt he had some clout there. And anyway, I went to the different Manhattan District contractors that were working with radioactivity to see what kind of instruments they had, and portable instruments. So I took their reports of the instruments and I deleted everything that related to the application that might tell what they were working on, just the characteristics of the instruments. And I made those available to other laboratories so they'd have the latest thing in instrumentation, but still preserving the security. And I made charts for, I studied biological effects of radiation to know which instruments were usable for that purpose. And I made chart for the military on what would happen with different levels of radioactivity, how much it would take for cause nausea, how much for the hair to fall out. And
did you have to observe? Did you have to observe experiments on this, or to get your data?
No, I went to the various people who were working in the field. Some of them were already a part of the Manhattan District, and most of them were by that time. And for example, one of the people that I gained information was Dr. Stone at University of California Medical School in San Francisco. He had done work with cancer patients, and he had given whole body radiation of very heavy doses to terminal patients to see if he couldn't bring them out of it. So as far as I knew then, he was the only person that had given whole body radiation under controlled conditions. And but there were a lot of people experienced with X-ray therapy, and some of those were within the Manhattan District, and so I was in the research division under Captain Peterson, later Colonel Peterson, at Chicago. Peterson reported to General Nichols, who was at Oak Ridge, but over all of the district, and Nichols reported to Groves. So that was a chain of command. And occasionally I get in trouble by going direct to the general.
What do you mean you would get in trouble?
Well, let's skip ahead in time now. I learned that there was, after Nagasaki and Hiroshima bomb, I learned that they were going to have a test in the Pacific. I sent a letter to General Groves directly telling him of the development of a new instrument that would be best for the Bikini tests, and told him the development of the Geiger counter that was the key to it. And I told him it was in the research stage, and it would take 60 days to get it into production, and we could do it in time for the test. And so I sent it directly to him. I should have, according to military protocol, I should have sent it through channels, but then it would take too long to get to him. Mm-hmm. So Captain Peterson at that time, he said he had received correspondence that he passed on to me that if there's going to be a test, and if you're going to be involved in it, you'll be notified in due time. And telling me how I should have done it. Well, then shortly thereafter, I received instructions to proceed with this, and they wanted the finished instruments in at least 100 and possibly 200 or 300 within 30 days. And I told them it would take 60 days to start production. Anyway, so I often took shortcuts because I wasn't a military man at heart. And to the military, I was a scientist, and to the scientists, I was military. I was sort of in between. And with the information I gathered, I found that most of these instruments were, they had to be calibrated every time they were used. You know, they'd have a calibration source to check it, not just. So I designed an electronic circuit that would avoid that. They were sensitive to battery voltage, for example. As the battery voltage changed with age, the output of the instrument would change. So I designed a circuit that was independent of the battery voltage over a normal range of the battery life. And that greatly reduced the weight and size of the survey meters. And that was the first one that was used for civil defense. Well, another thing I did there I was at the Chicago Metallurgical Lab.
How long were you in Chicago? How long were you in Chicago?
About a year and a half or
Okay.
a little more.
Okay.
Might be closer to 2 years.
Okay.
And see, when the Manhattan District headquarters were moved to Oak Ridge, I was back and forth between there and Chicago, and then the research division finally moved to Oak Ridge. Mm-hmm. And so I had my office there, but I still had operations in Chicago. I mean, I got to the point where I needed some technical help. And I knew Dr. Moon in Chicago, who had, Robert Moon, he had been head of the Signal Corps Electronic Training School in Chicago. And they closed that school out, and Dr. Moon picked some of his best students and came to the Manhattan District. Jim Schulkey was one of that group. And so I had access to the records of that school. And so some of the men were already in the district. So I picked from the records my assistant. And he was in infantry by then. And the reason I picked him is he was one of the top students, but his home was just outside of Chicago. And he'd appreciate being assigned there. Mm-hmm. And also, he was younger than I was.
What was his name?
Robert Smith.
Okay.
He was a terrific guy. And so I thought an older man might resent my being in charge, because I wasn't too old. So anyway, Smith was just a little bit younger, and he was fantastic. We'd be doing some research or experiments with things, and by the time I would need a tool, for example, by the time I decided what screwdriver I needed, he had it there for me. He was ahead of me. And he took over my operation at Chicago when I moved to Oak Ridge. So I was back and forth with him. And I was in Chicago when the bomb went off in Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm.
And,
what do you remember about that?
pardon?
What do you remember about that?
I remember, backtrack just a little bit, my wife was invited to a tea at Dr. Compton's home. Mrs. Compton entertained the wives of the researchers. And
This is in Oak Ridge?
No, this was
in Chicago.
Dr. Compton was head of the university contract at Chicago, the physics department. And my wife, Helen, came home and said, "What are you doing down there anyway?" I said, "I told you I'm working on x-rays." "Well, what's so important about x-rays?" She said, "Why did Lieutenant King tell us not to ask you what you're doing?" So, I don't know. See, we weren't supposed to tell our wife what we were up to. And so she knew I was interested in x-rays, and that really was part of what I was doing. And so when the bomb went off, I was on the second floor of the Ryerson building at the physics department at the University of Chicago. And I heard the announcement over the radio. And I was so excited. I leaped over the railing to the landing below and ran down to the telephone. I called Helen and said, "Turn on the radio and you can see what I've been doing."
What did she do?
uh,
How did she react?
Oh, she just almost dumbfounded. She was a home economics teacher, and she had physics training. She knew vaguely what it was all about, but she didn't know I was working it. And so then I'd been back and forth between Oak Ridge and Chicago, and she was still living in Chicago. And I got an apartment in Lenore City, just outside of Oak Ridge, and we decided to move down there. I said that the war's going to be over, but it'll be quite a while before I can get out of the Army. I have to have 4 years. They're not going to let us out like the last war. And so we decided to move down there. And I had twin daughters and a third one on the way at the time. And I thought it would be too much for the family to drive down. We just had a coupe anyway. And so they went down on a train, and I drove the car with a trailer with our worldly belongings on it. And I was to meet them at 6 o'clock in the evening when their train arrived, but I got delayed, and I didn't get there till midnight. They were asleep on the bench in the train station. And we went to our apartment in Lenore City. This was a Saturday night. And the next morning, there were two big burly MPs came to the door and handed me orders to pack for a 3 weeks trip and be ready in 15 minutes. I said, there's no way I can do that. If I got this trailer loaded with furniture, fine. I said, well, he said, that's our orders, we gotta bring her in. I said, if you will unload that trailer, bring it up to the second floor of the apartment, I can be ready in 15 minutes. Because the only thing we unloaded Saturday night was the mattresses we laid on the floor and slept there, and everything was still in. So they did that. And then they took me to Oak Ridge, and I went, reported to Colonel Peterson, and he took me across the room to General Nichols' office, and the general says, "Where were you, AWL?" Well, I could see by the expression on his face there was no time for excuses. So I just said, "Yes, sir." And I snapped to attention. He turned his head and he says, "Get that man out of here before I lose my temper." So Peterson gave me my orders, told me not to open it until I'm on the airplane. And then they rushed me to, I picked out some instruments for measuring radioactivity to take with me, and they rushed me to the airport. There was a flying jackass, they call it, airplane that was operated by the 509th Air Force that was part of the project. And this big plane was there, engines running, waiting for me. And we flew to San Francisco, and from there we took a ship, a hospital ship, the Haven. It was a new ship built for a hospital ship, but it had never been commissioned for that use, and that was our laboratory. And well, so I'm getting a little confused here. Yeah, that was for the Operation Crossroads, Bikini. No, wait a minute. No. I'm mixing this thing up.
Okay.
This particular situation was to go to Nagasaki.
Okay.
Right after. And so we went into Oakland, and then we flew to Tinian. The hospital ship was later, that was a Bikini. Okay. We flew to Tinian, and there we met the crew of the Enola Gay, and there was one fellow that I particularly liked, was Lieutenant Beasler, the electronics guy, and he was very helpful in explaining to me some of the things. He said that the B-29s had so much electronics on it that by the time that they took off, something was malfunctioning. There was, electronics wasn't as reliable in those days, and but they had redundant systems to anticipate some of the possible failures, and it was just fascinating to me. At Tinian, we got to see the mock-up of the bomb and to see how it was mounted in the B-29s and so on. And
what was your impression? What was your impression of the way the bomb worked?
Oh, well, I had a general idea of how it would work, but I wasn't really working on it.
Right.
I knew it was being done, but
What was your impression? What was your personal impression about it? Were you amazed? Were you in awe?
Yeah, definitely.
Were you curious?
Pardon?
Were you curious?
Yeah, I was very curious, and the crew were very cooperative in answering our questions. And there was General Farrell. General Farrell was in charge of the operation there. He reported directly to General Groves. And he gave us an orientation. He said, your mission is to prove that there's no radioactivity. I said, pardon me, General. My orders say I was to measure the amount of radioactivity. He said, well, it's not significant. And of course, he was concerned about public relations. And there was a man, Major Uano, Bud Uano, was a security man there, and he was assigned to our group. There were 17 of us in the group, and 10 of them were medical people. We went in there to learn as much as we could about the effects of the bomb, and we set up operations in actually the hospital was destroyed, so we set up in a school building a little farther out, and the medical people were helping the local doctors to learn or to treat the patients, and I surveyed the area for radioactivity, and the what was it? Military security people questioned the patients and where were you when the bomb went off, and so I was told where they were, and I would estimate the amount of radiation that they had received, so that the doctors would know how to treat them. And we knew how much radiation would cause nausea, how much would cause epilation, and if a patient was still alive after 30 days after exposure, there was a reasonable chance that they might be saved, because the radiation destroyed their blood cells, and if there were enough white corpuscles to reproduce it, after take about 30 days to build it up, if there are enough to reproduce the blood cells, then there would be a reasonable chance. During that period, they would have a very low count of white blood cells, and they were anemic. If the slightest contamination or irritation, they didn't have the white blood cells to fight it off. But after 30 days, they begin to develop their immune system again. And it was very, very pathetic. But we could learn a lot about the bomb by, well, my job was measuring the radioactivity, and there was a Captain Young was on the group was a mechanical engineer, and we collaborated. He helped me with measurements, and I helped him estimate the blast at different distances. And for example, there was the cemeteries in Nagasaki were very much alike, and they had block tombstones. They were all facing the same direction, and so where they were located with respect to the bomb would affect the result of a blast. And so close in, they were all knocked over, and you get out a mile or two, some of them were knocked over and some of them not. And so we could estimate what the force was at the time. And also, well, there are other things too. Let's see. We in measuring the gamma rays was very relatively easy and quick. And so we were in a Jeep crisscrossing the area to draw contour lines of equal radioactivity around it. And we traced it 32 miles for the downwind out to sea, and at that point it was maybe double the normal background at 32 miles downwind. Upwind, within a few miles, there was very little effect. So I have, I've been working on my autobiography, and
when did you start?
Well, I guess as soon as I got back from Bikini.
Okay.
Yeah. I probably had started a little bit before that, but anyway, I have my autobiography in chapters of time periods. And this one, for example, chapter 6 is, you're in the Army now. And so that has what happened within in that period, 4 years I was in the Army, except that I just kind of skip over, just casually mention the Nagasaki experience and the Bikini experience. I made a separate chapter. So this chapter 7, Recollections of Nagasaki, covers a period of just a few weeks. And this one, chapter 8, Memories of Bikini, that's a couple months.
Okay.
So, the reason I separate them is because as time to time, I remember different things and want to update it, or I can get additional information.
How many chapters have you written so far?
Well, I have 14, but the ones after the military are far less developed. Mm-hmm. I've been concentrating on these first, and so I have about 300 pages altogether, no more than that. Anyway, see, after I got out of the Army, I went to work for one of the contractors, a Victorian Instrument Company, and our big part of our business was working with the Atomic Energy Commission. Actually, my experience in the Manhattan District was provided me with a lifetime career. I was one of the first 5 scientists to be known as health physicists. And so I had a career as a health physicist from then on. And so I was an official U.S. delegate to the International Radiation Protection Association for 7 consecutive 4-year terms.
When to when? What time period?
I can't remember the exact time,
Okay.
but it was after the war, and
So into the 1960s or 1970s?
I think the 1960s to 1980s.
Okay.
Yeah. But that doesn't add up quite, but it's
Okay.
and so they had their first meeting in Milan, Italy, and that was before I was a delegate, and I just learned about it, and I was interested. But the second meeting was in Brighton, England, and I was a auxiliary delegate. One of the guys couldn't get there, so I was in the group. And we had meetings in Berlin and Paris, Vienna, Sydney, Australia. So at these International Radiation Protection meetings, we were comparing information. For instance, in our meeting in Australia, the Russian delegates were very open about giving us information about Chernobyl. The newspapers gave us the impression that they weren't very cooperative, but they were really wide open in telling us what happened and asking our opinions about it. And,
do you remember noticing similarities between Chernobyl and Nagasaki?
Well, they're so entirely different. See, Nagasaki was tremendously destructive. Chernobyl was bad enough, but in terms of destruction, minor, it's no, we went into Nagasaki and made measurements 5 days after the bomb was dropped. In Chernobyl, they had tighter restrictions, and they didn't get in there until quite a bit later. And there are a lot of exaggerated reports about Chernobyl. Of course, there are about, each of us has a different experience, and we look at things a different way, and sometimes we tend to blow up the importance of it, and talking to people last evening, I think, my goodness, were they in the same place I was? So it's, I think this is great. This meeting is gives us a chance to reminisce and to look at from different points of view. Colonel Yucker, I knew him in college, and our families visited back and forth during the war. But I had no idea some of the things he was doing, and my goodness, we have an awful lot of friends in common that we didn't even know that. And I hadn't seen him for about 10 years until I sent him an email telling him about this thing, and I wasn't intending to come because I have to come here in August for a month anyway. So, but when he decided to come, I said, well, I should come too.
That's wonderful.
And I really should thank Michael and the organization for all they're doing. Very early I was aware of their website, and I intended to give them a lot more information than I did. But in summary, I can thank the district for giving me a vocation.
That's wonderful. Are you going to publish your book?
I hope so. At least I'm going to publish it for the family. I don't know if a publisher wants to print it or not. There's so much out there on it that, and this is really not very scientific. It's more a collection of little memories of things that, so you know, I'm probably going to chop it off because it never ends. You can, you know, keep finding more information. Like here, I'm going to get leads that I'll follow up on, and it will remind me of things that happened that I didn't have in here. And then, of course, an autobiography ends when you don't have any more experiences. After I retired, I took concentrated more on autobiography and family history. I'm writing as much as I can about family genealogy and family history. And I took up art, fine art. I do oil paintings, and so now I've decided I'm going to paint some things from this period.
That's wonderful.
But I keep active. I square dance 4 nights a week, and I paint 3 or 4 times a week. And I spend 3 or 4 hours a day on the internet. I don't read newspaper. I get the news on the internet, and so every day I get genealogy information on the internet, and now I'm getting more and more often going onto the website that Michael has set up. That's fantastic. When I first saw it, I thought it was great, but it's just amazing how fast it's grown. And anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and I thank you.
Thank you very much for taking time to talk to me. You've had a fascinating career. Thank you very much.